A very dangerous weather pattern is set to impact the United States over the next 7 days, with a major heat wave expected to bring dangerous heat to much of the United States, and more significant severe weather and flooding is on the way, with damaging winds, large hail, and tornadoes being a possibility. So in today's forecast, we are going to break down exactly what you need to know about the weather that'll be impacting the United States over the next 7 days, and we'll begin with what's happening across the country today. And you'll notice right off the bat, back over in the Central Plains, we've actually had some really big thunderstorms just over the last 12 hours, including a bunch of flooding back over in central Kansas. This is all from very slow and stationary moving storms, and these storms even brought significant severe weather to areas like Wichita, Kansas, where damaging winds as high as 80 miles per hour were observed last night. Now, today we are expecting more severe weather to take place, especially in the northern plains, the Midwest, and perhaps even into the central plains, with damaging winds, very large hail, and the potential for a few tornadoes being on the table, and maybe even a conditional strong tornado risk being in play, which we'll talk more about here in just a moment. Back along the East Coast, we are finally drying out after a very active weather pattern here over the last few weeks. We are continuing to see pop-up showers and thunderstorms every day, but generally speaking, it is definitely a lot drier than before, and most of the storms are going to be more isolated, and severe weather is expected to not be as likely here over the next week across the southeast. Now let's talk more about the weather pattern that'll be impacting the United States over the next 7 days, and to look at that, we are going to look at the jet stream and our mid-level flow. Right now, we have a high pressure system that is built up across the southeast and the Ohio Valley. This is building up warmer air, and in addition to that, there's not nearly as much rain falling in these areas. But on the other hand, we still have a pretty potent jet stream back over in the northern plains and the Pacific Northwest for this time of the year, and this is going to help to allow shortwave troughs to move across the northern plains and as well as the Midwest over the next few days, which will continue to keep the threat of significant severe weather in play, and we could easily see multiple rounds of significant severe weather between now all the way through the weekend in these areas because of this weather pattern. By the middle and end of the week, we are kind of talking about the same exact weather pattern where shortwave troughs will continue to move across the northern plains and the Midwest, or scattered, maybe even numerous severe weather will be a possibility basically every day through at least Thursday, maybe even into Friday as well. And then our high pressure is going to build even larger across the southern tier of the United States, and this right here will be the beginning of a very dangerous heat wave that could cause a lot of problems across the United States by the end of this week and also into the weekend. And then eventually by next week, we are likely going to see the ring of fire develop, a little ring of fire weather pattern, which basically means our jet stream is kind of curving around a very large high pressure system in the Great Plains, almost an omega block weather pattern as well, where we got two low pressure systems on each side. But generally speaking, I do think the very tail end of July could be a bit quieter in terms of severe weather. The only area I'd really be keeping an eye on would be back over here in the Midwest and the Ohio Valley, where we might end up starting to see a northwesterly flow kick in, which could lead to lines of thunderstorms that could bring significant damaging winds and embedded tornadoes. And in some cases, you can get derechos in some of these types of scenarios. So that'll be something to keep an eye on. And the beginning of August looks no different. We are likely going to be talking about a very elongated and really dangerous heat wave that is going to be building across the United States for the foreseeable future. And unfortunately, this heat wave has already begun for many of you in the Mississippi River Valley. We have extreme heat warnings currently in effect just south of Kansas City near St. Louis, all the way back down into the northeastern parts of Louisiana. Extreme heat watches are now in effect as well for Wisconsin, most of Illinois and eastern Iowa, and then heat advisory stretching from Florida and South Carolina all the way back over towards Oklahoma. So again, a very hot stretch of weather is ahead even over the next few days, but it will eventually expand to include more of the United States by the weekend and early next week. Now, in terms of the actual temperatures that we can expect over the next week or two, these are the high temperatures that we can expect on Friday. And in the southern plains, we are expecting a lot of areas to reach the low 100s, even possibly near 110 back over in Wichita Falls, Texas. Back over in the northeast, including New England, we will likely see record-breaking high temperatures on Friday, with many areas in the upper 90s, possibly even near 100. By the weekend and early next week, we're talking about 100s reaching as far north as South Dakota, maybe even as high as 106 back over in southern South Dakota. And then by the middle of next week, this heat wave is going to continue. We will likely see some areas as well near Kansas City, Omaha, Nebraska, and even perhaps back over in central Kansas reach the 110s. And as a friendly reminder, there is a potential for power outages due to the strain on the power grid from everybody using their AC units here in the central and southern plains. Texas has this commonly happen almost every summer now. It is something that you definitely want to keep an eye on because power outages are possible, especially with how hot it is going to be in these areas. And don't forget that urban areas can also experience warmer temperatures temperatures than rural areas. This is because of all the concrete and also all the structures that are in cities like Dallas, Fort Worth, for example. So this can cause even more heat-related issues. And obviously the temperatures are going to be very high, but another thing that's going to be very high is the amount of moisture that is in the atmosphere, which when we combine the moisture to our temperature, that basically gives us a feel-like temperature, otherwise known as a heat index. And as we go into Sunday, we could be talking about some extreme heat back over in the Midwest and the northern and central plains, especially where the cornfields are. We could have areas feel like 110 to 120 degrees on Sunday. This is obviously very, very, very dangerous heat over here that we could be talking about. So I'll just throw it out there. If you have any plans on Sunday afternoon to go mow your grass, do some crazy outdoor activities for over 30 minutes, you might want to pass on those because it could get very hot. And again, this could be dangerous heat. We could have the potential for heat stroke as well in these areas because of how warm it is going to be. Now let's talk more about the severe weather potential for the next few days, beginning with today, which is Tuesday, and we have a large slight risk of severe weather in place, which includes Minnesota, Wisconsin, back into the Dakotas, and also Montana, and the marginal threat runs all the way down into Nebraska, Iowa, and southern Wisconsin, where all hazards of severe weather are on the table today, including the potential for significant damaging winds, which means that we could see damaging winds as high as 80 miles per hour this afternoon and evening, mainly across Minnesota, the Dakotas, and also far western Wisconsin. Large to very large hail is also a possibility out of any initial supercells that develop later today. Generally speaking, this is a conditional risk of severe weather. It really just depends on storms initiating. I think we'll see at least a few supercells form later today, which should keep this threat more elevated. There's also a chance for a few tornadoes. We actually have a fairly large area that we're watching for an isolated tornado threat this afternoon and evening, anywhere across Minnesota, including the Twin Cities, back over towards Des Moines, also as far west as southeastern Montana. So definitely make sure that you're staying weather aware, have multiple ways to receive warnings. There is a pretty good chance we'll be live later today if storms do initiate and they actually look like they could be tornadic. And on top of that, we might even see a pretty intense mesoscale convective system if everything goes perfectly forecasted. So definitely stay tuned. It could be a very active day of severe weather. It's just going to depend on the morning convection that is currently going through Minnesota and how fast that clears out. And then on Wednesday, the threat of severe weather continues across the central plains and back into the Midwest, where we have another large slight risk of severe weather from Nebraska back into the upper peninsula of Michigan, and the marginal threat goes from Kansas back into northern Michigan, where more damaging winds will be a possibility out of a line of thunderstorms or two. Large hail is only really going to be a concern back over in the high plains, where a supercell or two may initiate in the afternoon. And then the tornado threat for right now is on the lower side of things. We do have a 2% tornado risk near the Twin Cities, northern Wisconsin, near Wausau, and then also back into the upper peninsula of Michigan. So stay weather aware. There's also a chance of a live stream on Wednesday, especially if this event uptrends, so definitely make sure that you're staying tuned to the channel. And then Thursday may look deceiving since it's only a marginal threat of severe weather, but I do think that this does have the potential to be upgraded in future outlooks. We right now have a marginal threat of severe weather in place for Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, and Iowa, but I do think there's a chance it could get upgraded in a future outlook for areas like northern Illinois and southern Wisconsin. But it's going to come down to what happens really over the next couple of days with our storms that are going to be happening in the Midwest and the northern plains. But overall, damaging winds, hail, and a couple of tornadoes will be a possibility in these areas on Thursday. Now let's go day by day with the timing of severe weather, beginning with today across the northern plains. We are expecting storms to continue this morning with isolated damaging winds that'll track all the way through northern Minnesota during the late morning and early afternoon. And then eventually by 4 to 5 o'clock, if the atmosphere is able to destabilize, we have a very favorable environment over here in South and North Dakota and western Minnesota, where a few tornadoes are a possibility, but it's going to be contingent on these storms actually being in an unstable environment. With all the storms that are going through this morning, that could create a lot of sinking air, and that may prevent storms from really getting to their maximum potential this afternoon. With that said, I do have some confidence that we'll at least have 1 or 2 storms try to sustain themselves in this environment. Outside of that, we are expecting severe weather further off to the north and west to grow as we get closer to sunset. We may see an isolated tornadic supercell further north, but it'll mainly be a large hail and damaging wind threat in my opinion. And then by 10 to 11 o'clock, I do think we're going to eventually see a lot of storms fire off in both South Dakota and North Dakota and northwest Minnesota. And then we may eventually see a mesoscale convective system develop, which may bring a line of thunderstorms across Minnesota tonight and into early tomorrow morning. I also want to point out that there is obviously a 2% tornado risk across Iowa, southern Minnesota, and Wisconsin. We may see a few storms try to bubble up during the afternoon and evening. Not really super confident, though, that we're going to see anything that organized. It would just be an isolated low-end tornado potential. We don't have a crazy favorable environment down here, but with the veering winds that are in place, that's going to help to rotate any little storms that form in that environment. So something to keep keep an eye on, but generally speaking, shouldn't be talking about anything super duper significant. And then in terms of the timing for Wednesday, we are expecting another round of storms to fire off during the late morning and early afternoon across Minnesota and Wisconsin. Likely a line of thunderstorms producing numerous, maybe even at times, widespread damaging winds upwards of 60 to 70 miles per hour. A little bit of large hail is possible as well. Tornado risk should be pretty low out of this line, but it's definitely not zero. That'll eventually push into Wisconsin as we go into the early evening. So by around 6 to 7 o'clock, it'll be heading in the direction of Wausau, Wisconsin. This is what it looks like over in Wisconsin and Iowa. Notice how this area of storms will be really the main organized area that'll be moving across central and northern Wisconsin. All the storms in Iowa and as well as Nebraska will be mostly just isolated damaging winds, but with how outflow dominant they'll be, I highly doubt they'll be producing much more than 60-mile-per-hour winds. And then by 9 to 10 o'clock, storms will be moving into the upper peninsula of Michigan, where they'll begin to fall apart, and then storms will also continue back over in Iowa and as well as Nebraska, with isolated hail and wind continuing to be a threat during the late evening and early overnight hours. And then on Thursday, severe weather will continue to be a possibility across the Midwest and the Great Lakes. Despite there being a potential for maybe a slight risk in a future outlook, I don't think we're going to see much more than just isolated damaging winds and hail, and the damaging wind threat would be the primary concern on Thursday. This will be mostly during the afternoon. Don't really expect a whole lot after sunset, so just stay weather aware. Very low tornado risk across the board, but probably not anything too significant. Just something to stay weather aware about. With all this different severe weather events that we are currently experiencing, especially over the last few days, most of them are mesoscale events, so things could definitely change with Thursday, but it does not appear to be that significant as of right now. And then beyond Friday of this week, we are expecting the threat of severe weather to be mainly focused across the central and northern plains in the Midwest, but it should stay fairly isolated through the weekend. By early next week, we're really not talking about much of anything different. The main concentration of any severe weather will continue to be in the northern and central plains in the Midwest, really not changing anytime soon with our jet stream being so far to the north. And eventually, as we go into early August, things become a lot more uncertain, but I do think severe weather will be taking at least a little bit of a break across areas in the northern tier of the country, and then we may start to see our first signs of hurricanes or tropical storms forming in the Atlantic Ocean. It's been very quiet so far, but I don't think that's going to last too much longer. And as always, thank you all so much for watching today's forecast. If you are new to the channel, make sure to subscribe down below. There is a chance of a live stream today and tomorrow, so click the bell icon so you're notified if and when we do go live. We will likely have another video tomorrow, but if not, we'll have another one on Thursday, so stay tuned, and we'll see you guys all again in the next video or live stream.